My son called me on my 67th birthday, not to wish me well, but to ask for money. He pitied my small life. The retired librarian with a tiny pension. He had no idea that the pity money he was asking for was just a drop in the ocean of the fortune I secretly controlled. He thought I was his burden. He was about to find out I was his benefactor, and that by skipping my birthday dinner, he had just signed his own eviction notice from my life. And from my will. I want to see how far my story travels. So please, comment with the city or country you're listening from. And if you believe in justice for the quiet ones, make sure you subscribe, because you won't want to miss how this ends. The smell of rosemary chicken, the kind I only make for special occasions, filled my small, quiet house. I ran a finger over the polished silver, a wedding gift from 45 years ago, and adjusted the linen napkins one last time. Everything was perfect. For my 67th birthday, I didn't want a big party. I just wanted my son, Leo. I wanted one evening where he might look at me and see his mother, not just a reminder of a life he felt he had outgrown. He called it my quaint little life. The books, the garden, the quiet evenings. He lived in a different world. One he described with words like vision and culture, a world of art galleries and important people I couldn't possibly understand. Still, I held on to the hope that underneath the ambitious artist was the boy who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read to him. The clock on the mantel chimed 6, then 6:30. The candles I had lit began to drip wax onto the tablecloth. The roast, which had been perfectly browned, was now just sitting in the warm oven, its moment of perfection long past. The doorbell never rang. The gravel driveway remained empty. By 7 o'clock, a familiar ache settled into my chest. It wasn't a sharp pain. It was a dull, heavy resignation. He wasn't late. He wasn't coming. My heart didn't break. It just settled, the way dust settles on furniture in an empty room. I sat down at the head of the perfectly set table, surrounded by empty chairs, and looked at the place card with his name on it. Leo, such a strong name for a boy who had forgotten where his strength came from. He must be busy, I whispered to the quiet house. He must have just forgotten. It was the same excuse I had been making for him for the last 10 years. The phone rang just after 9, its cheerful sound an insult to the silence in my home. I knew it was him. Leo always called late, after the initial sting of his absence had settled, offering excuses that felt more like afterthoughts. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, just to prove to myself that I could. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice a smooth blend of casual and just a little bit rushed. "Sorry about tonight. I got completely swamped with this new gallery proposal. You know how it is." I didn't say anything. I just stared at the uneaten slice of cake on the counter. "Anyway," he continued, filling the silence I left for him, "the reason I'm calling is, well, things are a little tight this month. The gallery owner is raising the rent, and I'm trying to pull together funds for the new exhibit. I was wondering if maybe you could help me out. Just a small loan from your savings. I know you don't have much, but anything would help." I felt the blood drain from my face. He hadn't called to apologize. He had called to ask for more. He saw my life savings, the careful pennies I had scrimped and saved over 40 years as a librarian, as his emergency fund. He saw my life as a resource for his. The familiar burn of disappointment started in my chest, but then something else happened. My phone screen lit up with a notification. It was a link from my cousin Susan, a fellow book lover. The subject line read, "Isn't this your Leo?" I clicked on it while he was still talking about his artistic vision and the importance of his next show. It was an online interview with a local arts magazine. The headline read, "Leo Vance, the artist transcending his humble roots." And there, in the 3rd paragraph, was the sentence that changed everything. He was quoted as saying, "It's a challenge, of course, to create meaningful art when you're shouldering the burden of family. I love my mother, but her world is very small. My dream is to find a real patron, someone who understands that great art requires freedom from that kind of domestic obligation. A burden, domestic obligation." The words felt like stones hitting glass. The man on the phone asking for my last few dollars, was the same man telling the world I was holding him back. That was the moment the years of quiet hurt and swallowed pride finally ignited. It wasn't a wildfire. It was a cold, controlled burn. He was still talking, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was looking at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. I saw the face of a quiet woman who had given everything, and I decided right then that she had given enough. He had no idea who he was talking to. He had no idea who Quinn really was. I ended the call without saying goodbye. For the first time in our relationship, I was the one who hung up. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with a cold, ringing clarity. I walked from the kitchen into my late husband's study, a room I hadn't used for much more than storing old tax files. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and leather, a smell I used to associate with comfort. Tonight, it smelled like resolve. My hand didn't tremble as I knelt and turned the dial on the old floor safe, hidden behind a row of encyclopedias. The combination was the date of my first book deal, a secret I had kept for over 30 years. Inside, beneath my husband's will, was a different life, my life, a portfolio of investments, deeds to properties Leo knew nothing about, and a slim black folder with the contact information for one man, Arthur Croft, my literary agent, my financial manager, my wall against the world. I had chosen to live a quiet life for a reason. When the first Quinn book became a bestseller, the money was overwhelming. I saw what fame did to people. I didn't want that for Leo. I wanted him to grow up normal, to find his own path, not to be the son of a wealthy author. I wanted him to love me for being his mother, not for what I could give him. But my anonymity, my carefully constructed wall, had become his greenhouse for entitlement. My quiet life had convinced him I had no life at all. He didn't see me as a person protecting her peace. He saw me as a woman who had simply failed to achieve anything more. My sacrifice hadn't given him freedom. It had given him an excuse to be ungrateful. I stared at Arthur's number for a long moment. It was after 10 at night on the East Coast, but I knew he'd answer. He always did. I dialed, and his calm, familiar voice came through on the second ring. "B," he said, no surprise in his tone. "I've been wondering when you might call." "Arthur," I said, my own voice steady, a stranger to even my own ears. "It's time. I need you to make some changes to the will." "Of course," he said, a professional calm coding what I knew was years of quiet concern. And I took a breath. "I have an idea for a new investment, a philanthropic one. You could say it involves a small art gallery downtown. I believe it's called Vance Visions." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. I could picture him in his high-rise office, looking out at the city lights, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "An art gallery," he repeated, the understanding clear in his voice. "I think that's a brilliant idea. B, tell me more." I spent the next hour laying out the plan, not as a grieving mother, but as a silent benefactor about to make her presence known. He didn't question me once. He just listened, confirmed, and planned. When I finally hung up the phone, the house was still dark, but I was no longer sitting in the shadows. I was stepping into the light, my light, the one I had hidden for far too long. Leo wanted a patron. He was about to get one, just not the one he was expecting. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Leo's voice, when he left the message, was a breathless mix of disbelief and triumph. He sounded like a man who had just seen a miracle. "Mom, you are not going to believe this," his message began. "Some anonymous arts foundation, the Quinn Foundation. They want to be my patron. They want to cover everything. The gallery, my debts, all of it. My life is about to change." I listened to the voicemail twice, a strange calm settling over me. I didn't feel a flicker of guilt. The trap had been set, and the bait had been taken. Arthur had executed my instructions perfectly. He had created a foundation with my own money, using my own secret nom de plume, and presented it to my son as the answer to all his prayers. The irony was a bitter, satisfying taste in my mouth. A week later, Arthur forwarded me an email from Leo. It was addressed to the foundation's board, but I knew it was meant for me to see. It was a gushing, overly formal letter of gratitude. filled with talk of his artistic destiny and how this patronage would finally allow him to create his masterpiece. He wrote about his vision, his passion, his misunderstood genius. He never once mentioned his mother. He had already written me out of the story of his success, even before it had truly begun. From my small living room, I watched his new life unfold on social media. The first thing he did wasn't buy new art supplies or plan his next exhibit. He bought a new car, a sleek black convertible that looked ridiculous, parked in front of his cramped apartment. Then came the new clothes, the expensive dinners, the photos of him raising a glass with people I knew he had once called shallow and commercial. He was performing wealth, not earning it. He was playing the part of a great artist, funded by a mysterious benefactor, and he was playing it with a desperate, frantic energy. He was so busy building his new image that he didn't even notice the foundation of his old one was cracking beneath his feet. I didn't reach out. I didn't comment on his posts. I just watched, a silent observer to his self-created drama. I spent my days in the garden, my hands in the soil, tending to the roses my husband had planted. There was a simple honesty in the earth, a quiet logic that felt worlds away from Leo's manufactured success. I pruned the dead branches, knowing that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a plant and for a person is to cut away the parts that are no longer growing. Leo thought he was free. He thought he had escaped the orbit of his humble mother. What he didn't understand was that he was now orbiting a star of my own creation, and I was the one who controlled the gravity. He was so dazzled by the light, he never thought to ask where it was coming from. That was his mistake, and it was just the beginning. The meeting was set at a law firm that looked more like an art museum, floor-to-ceiling glass, minimalist furniture, and a silent, intimidating receptionist who looked like she had been carved from marble. Arthur had arranged it all. He wanted Leo to feel the full weight of the Quinn Foundation's power, to be so overwhelmed by the illusion of wealth and importance that he wouldn't look too closely at the details. Arthur told me Leo arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in a new designer suit that was a size too tight in the shoulders. He was practically vibrating with nervous energy. He paced the lobby, checked his reflection in the glass walls, and treated the receptionist with a condescending charm that I knew was his tell for when he felt insecure. When Arthur finally called him in, Leo walked into the conference room like he was stepping onto a stage. The contract was laid out on a long, polished table. It was thick, bound in leather, and looked exactly as important as it needed to. Arthur told me he spent most of the meeting explaining the financial clauses, the monthly stipend, the gallery's operational budget, the travel allowance for artistic research. He watched as Leo's eyes glazed over with greed. My son wasn't listening to the terms. He was counting the zeros, tucked away on page 17. Under the heading, Beneficiary Conduct and Responsibilities, was Clause 7b. Arthur had drafted it himself, using language that was both legally airtight and emotionally precise. It was written in dense legal jargon, intentionally buried between paragraphs about tax liabilities and quarterly reporting. The clause was simple. If you bothered to read it, it stated that the patronage was contingent upon the beneficiary upholding a certain standard of personal integrity. It specifically mentioned that any public act of disrespect or slander against the beneficiary's immediate family, particularly his mother, would be considered a material breach of contract. Leo didn't even skim that page. His eyes jumped from the payment schedule on page 5 to the signature line on page 20. He was so eager to claim his prize that he didn't even think to check for a trap. He saw the money, the freedom, the life he thought he deserved. He didn't see the fine print that tied it all back to the very person he was so desperate to leave behind. I can picture him now, picking up the heavy, gold-plated pen the firm had provided, his hand probably slick with a thin sheen of sweat, moving to sign his name, Leo Vance. He probably wrote it with a flourish, a self-important scrawl that declared his arrival into the world he had always dreamed of. He was signing away his future, thinking he was securing it. Arthur said that after Leo signed, he stood up, shook Arthur's hand too firmly, and talked about the synergy between his vision and the foundation's goals. He used all the right words, the ones he had learned from magazines and podcasts. He didn't have an original thought in his head, but he was a masterful mimic. As he walked out of that office, he wasn't just a funded artist. He was a man walking into a cage he had built himself, baited with his own ambition. The door clicked shut behind him, and the trap was armed. He had the money, the car, the illusion of success, and I had his signature right next to the one clause that would become his undoing. With the foundation's money secured, Leo's transformation was immediate and absolute. The struggling artist persona vanished overnight, replaced by a caricature of success he had clearly been rehearsing for years. His social media, once a sparse collection of blurry art photos and complaints about the cost of paint, became a highlight reel of a life he didn't build. He started by hosting a series of small, exclusive dinners at overpriced restaurants. The guest list was a calculated mix of local art critics, wealthy collectors he had never met, and young, attractive people who seemed to exist only on Instagram. He posted photos of the wine, the artfully arranged food, and the checks, always with a caption about the importance of celebrating the creative spirit. He was no longer just an artist. He was a brand. The phone calls to me changed, too. They became less frequent, but more performative. He would call while he was clearly in a public place, his voice loud, filled with a forced, magnanimous tone. "Mom, just wanted to check in," he'd say, the clinking of glasses audible in the background. "Things are going incredibly well. The foundation has been a dream. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you have the right support. It's a shame you can't be here to see it all, but I know you're proud." He wasn't asking. He was telling me. He was creating a narrative where my pride was a given, a silent background detail in the grand story of his ascent. He never asked how I was. He never asked if I needed anything. The calls were monologues designed to inform me of his new status, to remind me of the world I was not a part of. The final straw came about a month after he signed the contract. He called on a Sunday morning. "Mom, I'm having a party," he announced. No preamble. A big one. At the gallery, I'm finally going to introduce the Quinn Foundation to the world. It's going to be the biggest art event of the season. I waited. The invitation, I assumed, would be the point of the call. It's going to be a very exclusive guest list. He continued, a slight edge to his voice now. Critics from New York, some international collectors. It's really more of a business event. You know, high-powered networking. Probably not your scene. And there it was. Not a disinvitation, but something more insulting. A preemptive dismissal. He was telling me I wouldn't fit in before I even had the chance to ask if I was welcome. "I see," I said, my voice perfectly even. "I just didn't want you to feel uncomfortable," he added, the false concern dripping from every word. "It's going to be a late night. Lots of industry talk. You'd be bored, but I'll be sure to send you pictures." He was so certain of his own importance, so confident in my meekness, that he didn't even recognize the sound of a door being gently but firmly closed in his face. He thought he was protecting his image. He had no idea he was stepping onto the stage I had built for him. Right on cue. "That's very thoughtful of you, Leo," I said. "You just focus on your big night. I'll be fine." I was more than fine. I was ready. The party was set. The trap was waiting, and the guest of honor had no idea. The whole event was a performance, and he was the only one who didn't have a copy of the script. The night of the party, I chose my outfit with the care of a general, preparing for a final inspection. I wore a simple, elegant dress of deep navy silk, the kind of understated quality that whispers rather than shouts. My only jewelry was a single strand of pearls my husband had given me on our 30th anniversary. I wanted to look like myself, the woman Leo had forgotten, not the caricature he had created. Arthur picked me up in a town car. He didn't say much on the drive over, but he didn't need to. We had been friends for too long. He simply handed me a small, leather-bound program for the evening's event "Your son has a flair for the dramatic," was all he said, a dry smile touching his lips. The gallery was unrecognizable. Leo had draped the walls in black velvet, and the lighting was low and theatrical, making his abstract paintings look more important than they were. A string quartet played in the corner, and waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvre. The air was thick with perfume, ambition, and the low hum of self-important conversation. It was everything Leo thought success looked like. We arrived separately, just as we had planned. Arthur entered first, greeted immediately by a fawning Leo, who saw him as the face of the A.J. Quinn Foundation. I slipped in a few minutes later, through a side entrance, blending into the crowd near the back of the room. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and found a quiet spot behind a large, ridiculous metal sculpture that looked like a tangled paperclip. From my vantage point, I could see everything. Leo was holding court in the center of the room, his voice loud, his gestures expansive. He was telling a story, and a small circle of people were hanging on his every word, their laughter a little too loud, their smiles a little too bright. They weren't listening to him. They were listening to his money. I saw faces I recognized from the city's society pages. Art critics, gallery owners, wealthy widows with checkbooks as large as their diamond rings. This was the audience Leo had always craved, the one he believed he was finally worthy of. He was so caught up in his own performance, so blinded by the spotlight he had created for himself, that he didn't even scan the room. He didn't look for me. It never occurred to him that I would be there. A woman standing near me whispered to her companion, "That's Leo Vance. I heard his new patron is some mysterious recluse, an heiress from the East Coast." Her friend nodded. "He's brilliant. His work has such raw, emotional depth. You can feel his struggle." I almost choked on my water. His struggle, the only thing Leo had ever struggled with, was his own sense of entitlement. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a play unfold. All the characters were in place. The stage was set. The audience was waiting. My son was about to give the performance of his life. He just didn't know that I had already written the ending, and the final act was about to begin. It was almost time for his speech, the one he thought would solidify his place in this world, the one I knew would bring it all crashing down. The string quartet faded into a respectful silence. Leo stepped up to a small, elegantly lit podium near the center of the gallery, a glass of champagne in his hand. A hush fell over the room as he tapped the microphone. This was his moment, the culmination of everything he believed he had achieved. "My friends, esteemed colleagues, patrons of the arts," he began, his voice smooth and confident, resonating with practiced sincerity. "Tonight is not just a celebration of art. It is a celebration of vision, the vision I have held for so long, and the vision of a truly remarkable and anonymous benefactor, the A.J. Quinn Foundation." A polite ripple of applause moved through the room. I watched him from the shadows, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. He soaked in the adoration, a small, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. To be a true artist, he continued, his voice dropping into a more intimate, confessional tone. "One must often overcome great personal obstacles. I wasn't born into a world that understood my calling. I was raised in a very simple, very small world by a good woman, my mother, but a woman whose greatest ambition was a neatly weeded garden and a quiet evening with a book. Her world was not my world." He paused, letting the weight of his struggle settle upon the audience. I saw a few women in the front row nod with sympathetic understanding. "And while I am grateful for that humble beginning," he said, the condescension so thick you could taste it, "it was that very simplicity that fueled my desire for something more, something greater. It showed me precisely the life I did not want to lead, and for that, in its own way, I suppose I must thank her." That was the signal. As he raised his glass for a toast, Arthur Croft stepped forward from the side of the room, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Forgive the interruption, Mr. Vance," Arthur said, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable authority. that cut through the polite murmur. Leo looked momentarily startled, then recovered with a broad smile. "Arthur, the esteemed counsel for the Foundation. I am honored you could be here tonight." "I am here," Arthur said, his gaze sweeping across the silent room, "to clarify one small detail and to finally introduce the Foundation's founder, the mysterious recluse herself. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to present Quinn." Every head in the room turned as Arthur extended a hand, not toward the door, not toward the stage, but toward the shadows where I stood. I took a slow, deliberate step into the light. The collective gasp was audible. The sea of faces turned from Arthur to me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and shock. Leo's face crumpled. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty, sickly white. The champagne glass trembled in his hand. "Mom," he whispered, the word a strangled puff of air. "Hello, Leo," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the stunned silence. Arthur did not wait for the drama to settle. "And I am afraid I must be the bearer of bad news," he announced, his tone shifting from professional to glacial. "In your speech just now, you publicly disparaged your mother. In doing so, you have directly violated Clause 7B of the contract you so eagerly signed. The dignity clause." Leo stared, speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Arthur held up a single sheet of paper. "I quote," he said, his voice ringing with finality, "This contract will be rendered immediately null and void should the beneficiary engage in any public act of slander or disrespect toward his mother. You have just done so in front of more than 50 witnesses. The party and your patronage are officially over." The silence in the gallery was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of Leo's champagne glass slipping from his nerveless fingers and shattering on the polished concrete floor. No one moved. No one spoke. The guests, who moments ago were hanging on his every word, now stared at him with a cold, detached curiosity. They were witnessing a spectacular fall from grace, and they were mesmerized. Leo stood frozen on the podium, a statue of disbelief. His face, which had been so full of smug confidence, was now a mask of pure panic. He looked from me to Arthur, his eyes wide and wild, searching for some sign that this was a joke, a terrible, cruel performance. He found none. "As per the terms of the now voided contract," Arthur announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel, "the A.J. Quinn Foundation will immediately move to reclaim all assets. This includes the funds in your accounts, the lease on this gallery, and all artworks currently held as collateral against the Foundation's initial investment." He glanced at his watch. "Our legal and security teams will be arriving in 15 minutes to begin the process of securing the premises. I suggest you all finish your drinks." That broke the spell. The hushed whispers started, spreading through the room like a virus. I could see the sideways glances, the smirks forming on the faces of the critics who had praised him just an hour before. They weren't seeing an artist anymore. They were seeing a fool, a man who had been handed a kingdom and had, in a single, arrogant speech, burned it to the ground. "No," Leo finally stammered, his voice hoarse. "You can't, Mom. Tell them it's a mistake." He was looking at me, pleading. For the first time all night, he was looking directly at me. And what he was asking for wasn't forgiveness, it was a rescue. He wanted me to be the same mother who had always cleaned up his messes, who had always smoothed things over, who had always put his comfort before her own dignity. I didn't say a word. I simply met his gaze, my expression calm, and held it. I let him see the woman he had underestimated. I let him see the quiet strength he had mistaken for weakness, and in my silence, he found his answer. There would be no rescue. Two men in dark suits, professional and imposing, entered the gallery. They spoke quietly to Arthur, who nodded and then gestured toward the podium. Leo stumbled backward as they approached him. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I had seen enough. I turned, and with Arthur at my side, I walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for us, as if we were royalty, their curious, pitying eyes following me. I didn't look at any of them. I kept my head held high and my steps steady. As the cool night air hit my face, I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lift from my shoulders. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was release. Behind me, the sound of the party was dying, replaced by the quiet, efficient hum of consequences arriving. I had left Leo alone in the ruins of the life he thought he wanted, a life built on a foundation of disrespect. He was finally, truly, on his own, and I was finally, truly, free. The weeks that followed were quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clean, clear sky. The art world buzzed with the story of the Vance Gallery's spectacular collapse. But my name was only mentioned in whispers. I had retreated back into my peaceful, anonymous life, just as I had always intended. Arthur handled the aftermath with his usual quiet efficiency. The gallery was emptied, the assets were liquidated, and the funds were returned to the foundation. Leo, I heard through the grapevine, had lost everything. His car was repossessed, his apartment lease was terminated, and the friends who had once toasted his genius now crossed the street to avoid him. He was forced to take a job at a framing shop, a humbling 9-to-5 existence that was the exact opposite of the grand artistic life he had envisioned. I didn't feel joy at his downfall. I just felt a profound sense of peace. The universe had a way of balancing its own books. One morning, about 2 months after the party, Arthur called. "B," he said, "there's a building for sale. The old city library branch downtown, the one they were going to tear down to build condos." I knew the place, a beautiful old stone building with arched windows and a history that stretched back 100 years. "I see," I said, a new idea beginning to form in my mind. 3 months later, the Quinn Community Library and Art Center opened its doors. We didn't have a lavish party. We had an open house with lemonade and cookies, baked by the ladies from my old neighborhood book club. The space wasn't cold and minimalist like Leo's gallery. It was warm, filled with comfortable chairs, good lighting, and shelves packed with books for anyone to read. The walls were covered not with expensive, abstract canvases, but with art made by local students and seniors. I didn't put my name on the building, but I was there every day. I started a weekly story time for the neighborhood children, my librarian skills finally being put to good use again. I watched as people from all walks of life came in, seeking knowledge, or just a quiet place to sit for a while. This was my legacy, not a fortune passed down to an ungrateful son, but a space built for everyone. Last week, a letter arrived at the library, addressed to me. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar. It was from Leo. It wasn't a letter asking for money or forgiveness. It was short, just a few lines. "Mom," it read, "I've been taking classes at the community college, business management. I got a job at the framing shop to pay for it. For the first time, I think I understand what it means to build something yourself. I pass by your library every day on my way to work. It's always full of people. You did a good thing." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of my desk. I didn't write back. It wasn't time for that yet. Maybe one day it would be. But for now, the silence between us was no longer a weapon or a wall. It was just space. Space for him to grow and for me to heal. That afternoon, as I was reading a story to a group of wide-eyed toddlers, I looked up and saw a young boy sitting in the back, sketching in a notebook. He had a focus and a quiet intensity that reminded me of someone I used to know. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. My life wasn't a grand, dramatic story anymore. It was a collection of these small, perfect moments, and it was more than enough. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. Beatrice's journey was about reclaiming her dignity, not through revenge, but through rediscovering her own purpose. It reminds us that our value is not defined by how others see us, but by the legacy we choose to build for ourselves. So many of us have felt overlooked or taken for granted by the very people we've given our all to. I want to know your story. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand? Not out of anger, but out of love for yourself. Share your experience in the comments below. Your story matters, and this is a safe space to tell it. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. There are many more stories of strength to share.